Everyone wave. Sorry. Yeah, I was taping. She got. Every once in a while, it tapes the audience, and I see some guy like duck out of the way, which means he's wanted. And then he's like coming after me afterwards to like get rid of it. You know? Okay, welcome back. I'm sorry to those who watch every day that we've been on vacation, but I'm sure you've been on vacation as well. Here we are at the Essentials program, Practical Spirituality, here in Asia Torah in the Old City of Jerusalem. We have a rainy day after Pesach, which is a little rare. Just closing the back light here. But it's you should know that it's not that weird that it's raining. You'll notice if you look at next year's calendar that we have a Shana Sibur. It's a leap year, so we're going to be adding an extra month to keep the seasons in sync. If you hold by a lunar calendar, spirituality always works off lunar calendars, not so much solar calendars. You know, look at most spiritual groups work off the moon. The moon has, you know, not that the sun doesn't have its relationship to us, it really does, but the moon has that waxing and waning element, which is causing energy flow in a specific way that has to do with spirituality. So hence the Jewish people follow the lunar calendar. But the problem is if you follow the lunar calendar, your holidays start changing months and stuff and changing seasons. But our holidays are quite seasonal. Hanukkah is always in the winter solstice. Sukkot is always in the spring. It's the gathering of the grain after the summer. Pesach is always in the spring. It's a spring rite of passage, Pesach. So in order to stick with the seasons, we have to adjust our calendar accordingly. Whereas you'll notice Islam does not adjust their calendar, and therefore Ramadan can fall out any time of the year. We prefer it falls out in winter because then they have very short days. They fast only by day and they feast at night. So they have short days, cool, nice, short days, and then they feast at night, everything's cool. But when it falls out in the summer, which it happens once every couple of years, then they're much more aggravated and a lot more stuff. Like the Israeli government knows that they got to be on extra alert when Ramadan falls out in the summer months. We always dread summer Ramadan months. Yeah. Now, today's subject is Jewish ethnocentricity. You know the term ethnocentric? You know what an ethnicity is? Yeah. Ethnicity is an ethnic group. Ethnocentric means that you are overly focused on your group, like you think your group's where it's at. So someone who's ethnocentric is someone who thinks their group is where it's at. Now, we are, you mind sitting here just to man the camera, or woman the camera, please? It probably doesn't need anything, it's set and forget, but just in case. Thank you. Now, it's crazy, even the subject Jew and Gentile is a crazy thing to say. Jew and Gentile. Like there's Jews and then the whole rest of the world are Gentiles. Because we don't necessarily see Christians or Mormons or Muslims or Africans or Hindus, or we call them Gentiles. Like the fact that they may have different lifestyles or different, beliefs and stuff. To the Jewish people, they're Gentiles. They're just, there's Jews and there's Gentiles. But it's not just that. Gentiles see themselves that way. As long as Gentiles have had any relationship to Jews in their country, in their cities, whatever, they always know, like they would say to you, I'm a Gentile. They know they're Gentiles. There's Jews and there's Gentiles. But it's a very strange distinction, Jew and Gentile, because we're a tiny population. We make up 0.01% of the 0.001% of the world population, meaning 99.9% of people on the planet are Gentile. And there are some 13, 14 million Jews. China, when they do a census of how many Chinese there are, their margin of error is something like 80 million people. And we're 14 million people calling ourselves Jews. I mean, can you imagine? It'd be like there's some weird did I say weird? Sorry, there's some obscure country in Africa that has 13 million people in that particular country. And they're called the Bafufsticks, we'll call them. So they're the Bafufsticks, 13 million of them. Now, can you imagine going around the world when people are saying, so, what are you? And you're like, I'm Gentile. What is that supposed to mean? Well, I'm not a Bafufstick. You'd be like, what's a Bafufstick? You're like, yeah, it's this obscure little country in Africa, and I'm not one of them. But yet the world knows you're either Jew or you're Gentile. There's lots of types of Gentiles, but you're either Jew or you're Gentile, which is bizarre because we are the tiniest minority. Why would anyone distinguish themselves from this, invisible people? And the answer is because we're not invisible. We're the most visible. We are the very most visible. And you will find this little sliver of land, which when you're looking at an atlas, they have to put the word Israel over the Mediterranean because it doesn't fit over our country. It's such a toothpick that our little land, like even the slightest thing happens here. I mean, the prime minister passes wind or something. It's on the front page of the world's newspapers, whereas something like really huge could happen, like a whole town gets wiped out by some radical group in Africa. Shows up on if it shows up at all, it shows up in the middle of some other page somewhere in a newspaper. This place, anything moves in this country, it shows up in the news. All eyes are on Israel. So it's a fact. It's a fact. You can't get out of it. It's a fact that this tiny population has this massive impact. And and just to give one more illustration, what I'm talking about is Nobel Prizes. Nobel Prizes are prizes given to people who have made an exceptional contribution to any field of whether it's thought, science, humanity. And normally the Jews are all kind of absorbed into, for example, Russia's Nobel Prizes. Whoever's Jewish there, it doesn't say Jewish. It doesn't have a J by his name. It just says his name. And if he's an American Jew who gets a Nobel Prize, it doesn't put J by that name. It just has his name. And if it's Israeli Nobel Prize, so it'll say Israel. But what happens if you extract all the Jews out of every country for Nobel Prizes? Take all the Jews out of the lists of all those countries. And you instead have one list called J, and including all the Israeli Nobel Prizes. And you just scroll down. You put all the countries at the top. One of the countries is J for Jews. And you scroll down. Guess who has the most Nobel Prizes?
Jays.
The Jays. The Jays have the most Nobel Prizes of all Nobel Prizes on Earth.
You know, after category, you're talking about science.
I'm talking about if you put all the categories together. Every Nobel Prize together. When you put them all together, the Jays, but it's not by a small margin, it's by a crazy margin. Someone did this and sent it as kind of a viral email back when people used email, and you click on it, and it was crazy. You could scroll, you could literally tape down your scroll button. Because, America had a lot of them, and Russia had a lot of them, but the Jays, the Jews, it just kept going and going and going. It was like a giant pillar that just kept going and going and going for pages of Nobel Prizes. This is out of a population that just does, it's an insignificant, if it's a pie chart, whatever line you draw for the Jews is too thick for our population. And it gets particularly weird when you look at the fact that we lost a third of our people at the hands of the evil empire, the Nazi regime. We lost a third of our people during this period. Not only that, Jews have been persecuted over this period as well in many places. There was also the whole dealing with building the country of Israel, the state of Israel. There was whole movements of Jews. When you're moving, you're generally not earning Nobel Prizes. You're just trying to make sure you don't forget your stuff. like meaning Operation Magic Carpet brought in all the Eastern Jews into Israel in 1949, 1950. Meaning we've been like kind of unsettled during this whole period. And even in such an unsettled time, look at what we did. Which reminds me of the post-war Jews. Did you know that after World War II, the Ashkenazic Jews who had just come out of hell in Europe, they within a decade had completely rebuilt themselves, but to a level of wealth that Jews have never experienced in our entire history. I mean, think about, some of you may know what I'm talking about if you know Brooklyn at all, or Los Angeles at all, or some of these places where Jews went after surviving the biggest hell. Meaning, for example, the people who live in ghettos in America who have basically been emancipated more or less from the stuff they went through. Let's say since Martin Luther King, let's say since those days, they've certainly, if they want to make their way all the way up any ladder, whether financial, political, whatever, we had Obama as president, they can do it. They can get out. They can get out of the ghetto if they choose to. And you see the Jews came out of, are you kidding, those ghettos that inner city people live in, with crime and the Crips and the Bloods and and the drugs and everything, like where all these people are living and dealing, having very difficult lives. That place looks like Palm Springs compared to what the Jews went through till the end of the war. And yet a decade later, they went from emaciated, swollen-skulled, distended-bellied people who lost everything, but everything, meaning if they were married, they lost their wife or her husband, they lost all their children, they lost their parents, they lost their siblings, and by miracle, made it out. And 10 years later, had rebuilt themselves into people who, you looked at them, they were like the highest level of possibility that a society could ever afford an individual to achieve within 10 years. So who are these people? And then the final illustration that I'd like to give is what I call the 3Ds, which I've said a million times in here, so pardon me if you've heard this a million times. But the 3Ds are distracted, depressed, and devoted. Distracted, distressed, depressed, and devoted. I've been all three actually in my history. So just what happens is you have this Sinai, this collective subconsciousness. Meaning the whole Jewish nation are these people that experience Sinai. And we had this moment of the Sinai experience. The THX, surround sound, Omnimax, 3D, LSD, blow away experience like no nation has ever experienced, ever. There's been individuals who've had prophecy, but not a whole nation together. And the prophecy was stronger than the greatest prophecies in history, which makes no sense at all, but that's what God did. Imagine if you and I were set up for a prophetic moment. Yeah, who's going to get the bigger goods? Who's going to get the heavier moment? You or I. So God's going to measure both of our ability to handle it because he doesn't want to hurt us. And you'll get your amount, I'll get my amount. You may get more than me. I don't know what your background is on prophetic experiences. But God generally measures out gently to the prophet. You can imagine that Jonah the prophet probably didn't get the prophecy of Ezekiel the prophet, who saw the chariot. And Ezekiel probably did not experience what Samuel the prophet experienced. And Samuel the prophet definitely didn't experience what Moses experienced. You get that? But the Jewish people, every single man, woman, and child, from the elderly down to the little guys, everybody got a prophecy that was more intense than the greatest prophets ever received, with the exception of maybe Moses. Full-on freak-out experience. And that then becomes, that's going to last for generations. And you guys know that reincarnation exists. You know what that means, like multiple lives? So according to Jewish tradition, all of us are reincarnations. There's no such thing as new souls since the destruction of the first temple. We're all coming around. Not only Jews, Gentiles have their own system of their soul regeneration, and we have our regeneration. Although you could be born a Gentile, but probably during your lifetime you'll have made your way back to your Judaism. Meaning you're born in a Gentile body, but a Jewish soul. So but we regenerate. But did you know that sometimes previous lives can bleed into current lives? You know about that? You can actually have bleed-throughs. And the most common reason that people's previous lives will bleed into this life is because of the nature of their death. If the death was something particularly horrific, the shock factor of the trauma of it can actually bleed into this life. And the way it would show up in this life would be super unrational paranoia. I mean, you'll be afraid of something that you never experienced. You see, if you've been bitten by a dog, you're going to be afraid of dogs until you somehow work it out. When we are afraid of something, it's rational. But there are people who have an intense, unrational fear of something. And those people generally are experiencing an unrational fear of something because the trauma stayed inside the system. Even though normally you're born fresh and you have no recollection of a previous life, in the case of trauma, if someone died through extreme trauma, it can lead to paranoia, but a very specific. I'm not talking about paranoia, the psychological paranoia. I'm talking about phobia, that they'll have a phobia of something very specific that does not have anything to do with their past. They've asked their parents, did this ever happen to me? Did I almost drown? Or something like, no, you never almost drowned. And I have had my share of experiences with past life regression, and I have many of those cases where people dealing with irrational terror over certain things that when they went in a past life it did show up that way without telling them, meaning they were telling me that they found themselves. And also amazingly, having gone through it through past life regression therapy, having gone through the trauma again in a past life, they were fine once they came back. Meaning, for example, I had a guy who was going on a yeshiva hike in the Golan Heights where you have to jump off a cliff into a water. You put your backpacks in trash bags, throw them off the cliff into the water, they float across, and everyone has to jump off. But this guy, he was so afraid of water, he'd never even taken a bath. Just kidding, he takes showers. So he can't even get in a bathtub, this guy. So he came to me for a past life session, which is part of hypnosis. So we did a past life session, and he did drown. In the past life, he drowned. We worked it all through. You know, you can do a whole therapy session over the trauma of the death, and he was fine, and basically fine ever since. He went on the hike, jumped off the cliff into the water, and more or less was good. Now, why are we talking about bleed-ins? Is because the Sinai experience, that bleeds in. It bleeds into every Jew, no matter what Jew you'll meet. It could be the most secular Jew. It could be a Jew who doesn't even know she's Jewish. She could be raised amongst Gentiles. But she'll always have, as long as they're from the Sinai period, they have the bleed-through of Sinai. And so they'll have one of these Ds. Distracted is the majority of Jews. And that is, what happens is, let me explain how the Sinai 3D thing works, is that you have, let's call it like you have a heart. Let's say you have a part of your heart that's called Sinai. The word Sinai is written on it. And it wants to be fulfilled. Let's call it like a heart, instead of a hard heart, we'll call it a hard drive. It's a hard drive. And it wants Torah software. You know, if you have a Sinai hard drive, it wants Torah software. Now, if someone's raised secular, so the only software they were given was, you know, MTV, McDonald's, you know, soccer. You know, and it's like you got this Torah hard drive with silly software that doesn't work. It'd be like It'd be like a computer that has a terabyte of hard drive, working hard drive, like 1,000 gigabytes. And the only program on your computer is calculator. So it's like a Ferrari in traffic. A Ferrari in bumper-to-bumper traffic is a picture of frustration. And so too, someone from the Sinaitic prophetic experience, who experienced that 3D blow-away experience at Sinai, and is raised secular, has nothing to do with the hard drive. The hard drive is just raring to go, but nothing to process. And so what happens is that causes what is called an existential angst, or a what Viktor Frankl called a search for meaning. And what happens is you wind up, I don't know if you guys ever saw this kid's book called Are You My Mother? You ever seen that? What was it, a bird fell out of the nest or something? And it's going up to everything it finds, like, are you my mother? You know, it's a giant tractor truck. Are you my mother? Are you my mother? It's just looking for anything to see if it's its mother. So you go into, what happens is these kids who are born and raised to Jewish homes, but not keeping Judaism, they wind up going up to everything they can to see if it's your mother. Are you my mother? If I become a millionaire, are you my mother? Or if I become a high-tech startup guy, are you my mother? But the thing is, they're not your mother. None of that's Sinai. And so you wind up with the same exact need for meaning, the same exact search for fulfillment that you had in the first place, even after the million or the startup company or the looks you were going for, or being the party guy, or being the the race car guy, or the athlete, or all that stuff is distraction, and that's why I called it distracted, because people distract and they distract and they distract. Now, eventually, some people just, I don't know if they get tired of it, but they can't distract themselves anymore. And I got to that place. My distraction was surfing. I really, people think it's very romantic that I surfed, like the surfing rabbi and stuff. To me, there's nothing romantic about me having been a surfer or being a surfer. Today, it's just a sport, but in those days, it was a distraction. And why did I have to go to this country and that country and spend this amount and have more boards and more bigger waves and bigger waves and bigger waves, until I was riding waves that, if you saw the waves I was riding, you would all you'd drown just watching me surf. But meaning I only started getting excited when waves were about the height of our ceiling in here. That was when, there's waves. But if it was doubly the size, then there's really waves. Meaning that means no one's expecting me to show up anywhere during daylight hours. Not school, not work, not nothing. I'm not showing up. Because I'll be out in the ocean, right, in the double the size. If it got triple this size, so then we were we're in the 25, 30-foot range. So then we were in heaven. But what was I doing? What was I doing? I was distracting. Now, I happen to have a very strong Torah hard drive, and it just didn't last long enough. I think what happened when I was about, I don't know how old, but somewhere in I would say it started at 18. I was surfing in Indonesia. I was living in a tree house in the jungles of Indonesia by myself, surfing, and it was just the stupidest thing you could ever do. I did come back in a wheelchair, actually. I arrived in LAX in a wheelchair. Coral was growing in my leg. What happens is when you get a coral cut surfing, you need to clean it really well. The cut was so small that I cleaned the wrong spot. I couldn't even find the cut. And that was all it took. So I did arrive in LAX to my parents in a wheelchair, 6 weeks later. And but anyway, I think in that jungle was the first time I realized this isn't doing the job. I'm not distracted enough. And then I went to university, and I was at a surf school. It wasn't school for surfing, but it was mostly surfers going to school there. So in that university, so I was in Santa Barbara. surfing in Santa Barbara for 5 years. But by the time I was done in Santa Barbara, I remember literally dragging perfect waves. I remember dragging myself across the beach. Just like, okay, I'm gonna surf, I'm not gonna miss it. There's no way I'm missing this. I'll be out there. And I'm gonna surf strong and I'm gonna surf hard. But I remember dragging my feet across the beach going like, not doing it anymore. It doesn't work for me. And once you have a really powerful hard drive, which is that powerful search for meaning, but nothing filling the meaning nor able to distract the meaning. So what do you get when you have this huge desire for meaning but no meaning? What do you get? Get depressed. And this is a kind of depression that is unique to Jews. Not that Gentiles don't have it. There are plenty of Gentiles get it. But it's unique to Jews, that Jews suffer depression more than other people. You can check out the numbers online. You can Google it. But we have some weird, out of proportion amount of depression. Obviously per capita, because we make up this tiny amount of people. But per capita, compared to Gentiles, Jews suffer greater depression. And the reason seems to be, and again I quoted earlier Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl wrote this amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a real serious root of depression, is not having enough meaning in your life, or not having any meaning in your life. For Jews, it's not that I don't have enough, it's that I have none. Like, things don't seem meaningful to me. And when you're dealing with meaninglessness, it leads to depression. Now, I don't want to focus a lot on the following point, but it's just something you might want to think about, is that need for meaning is the, I don't know how to say this exactly, it's the most important thing of life, is what you're doing here. Like, what are you doing here? What can be more important than why you're here? What makes your life meaningful? What are you doing here? I'm asking all of you, like, what are you doing here? Now, I know that question is generally not the first question brought up, when you're, I don't know, watching the news or YouTube. But what are you doing here is important. If you know what you're doing here, your life's very meaningful. If you don't know what you're doing here, and you're not very good at distracting yourself, so then life can be pretty rough. Now, some people might say the question of what you're doing here is a curse. Leads to depression. Leads to all kinds of other distractions. So you could call it a curse. But to me, the question of what you're doing here is a blessing. It's a blessing. That question is a blessing. Why? Because I always have mercy on God. Poor God. Imagine being God. Creates you. And if you don't ask what you're doing here, so then you're just stuck in some kind of 3D video game till you die. And the whole purpose of God having made you never gets fulfilled. Because I'll tell you what the purpose of creation is. The purpose of creation, besides a lot of other details, is to have some kind of recognized connection between you and that which creates all this thing. I mean, if you know enough physics, you're right now inside a projection. This is just a 3D projection here. And you have a soul, which is the true you, which has a avatar, which is your body. Your body is just the avatar for the soul. And so God put your soul into this avatar inside of 3D projection that you might connect to God. That's why you're here. So the question of why you're here, it's that. The rest is details. That you got to learn the details. But that's like the basic reason why we're here. But if someone isn't trying to find that out, if someone's not trying to figure out what we're doing here, so then he's a bumper more than a ball in the pinball game here. He's more of a bumper that balls bounce off of. He's not the ball in the pinball game. But the second you get what you're doing here, the second you realize what you're here, you're the ball in the pinball game. And then you start realizing you have flippers. Think of the ball and the flippers are on the same team. You got free will. You can choose left, you can choose right, you can choose all over the place. And shoot that ball up to the top of the machine and let it ding away on every mitzvah you can find. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Bam. Nail it back up the machine. More mitzvahs, more mitzvahs, more mitzvahs. You know, learning Torah, like the ultimate. Learning Torah is when the ball shoots through that thing that spins around a bunch of times. It racks up a bunch of points. You know, every time. You can just sit and learn. Just sit and just keep turning pages. It just keeps flipping around. Torah study is the ultimate downtime mitzvah. Because think about it. In your morning, you already said Shema on time. You're wearing you already put on your tefillin. You know, what do you got left? What are you gonna do? Go help old ladies cross the street all day? What if no old lady comes across the street? Like, you're gonna be stuck. Open up any piece of Torah. You're in mitzvah land. It's literally like you're wearing a tefillin all day. But if someone doesn't ask the question, what am I doing here? So then he's not a pinball, he's a bumper. He's just a bumper. And there's something to be said for bumpers. You know, you can still get married, raise children, go to the park and watch them grow, and go to work, and watch movies, and go to concerts, and do some sports, and, you know, live a life. That's okay. Being a bumper isn't the end of the world. But for God, it is. For God, that's the end of the world. That's like, it is the end of the world. Because that means that creating that particular person went without purpose. And God really wants us all to be pinballs. He doesn't want us to be bumpers. And it was just by a stroke of luck that I personally got to get to the devoted part. Devoted to the Sinai thing. And yeah, I guess you can tell just by my look, I'm pretty dedicated. By the way, these, unfortunately today, these don't mean much, but they mean a lot to me. And my, you know, my tzitzis are also, they mean a lot to me as well. And the learning I did today and my davening I did today, it's all very important to me. And taking your life and dedicating it to Hashem is like, you're whole, you're at peace. The whole storm settles, and all that existential angst is relaxed and released and relieved, and now I'm here to work. Like now I'm a coal miner. Now I'm here to dig for, you know, I'm digging for coal down here. If I've been thrown down here in this avatar, and I know what the name of the game is, so I'm here to make the biggest impact I possibly can to better people's lives, to make a difference. Now, I know a lot of people who are doing that without understanding what they're doing here. They just decided to make an impact and make people's lives better. That's beautiful. But it still comes with the existential angst. When you get in touch with a purpose, you get your meaning thirst dealt with, quenched, and then you can now get to work here and be devoted. Spend your waking hours devoted and dedicated to God and Torah and mitzvahs, and live a devoted life. Now, back to ethnocentricity and ethnocentricity. There was 2,000 years of disappointment. Abraham was born in 1948, 1,948 years after Adam. From Adam all the way to Abraham was nothing but disappointment. Abraham's generation wasn't much better. But what God did was he decided, you know what, this place is such a disappointment, no one's interested in me, that I'm going to create a people off of Abraham through a breeding exercise. He was going to breed off into Ishmael so that there could be an Isaac. He was going to breed off of Isaac so that there could be a Yaakov, meaning God bred off of Isaac into Esav so that there could be a Yaakov. Yaakov had the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes go into slavery, into Egypt. We create our nation down in the womb of Egypt. We come out of the birth canal of Sinai, the splitting of the sea into Mount Sinai, all the way into the land of Israel. And ever since then, we have become this nation that's, the Jewish people that everyone seems to know about. Now, I'm just going to mention, it's in our last 5 minutes together. There's 7 minutes left, but I'll probably finish in 5. Our last 5 minutes together, what I'd like to just bring up is that our relationship as Jews is really unique in that our relationship is to the King of the universe. It's to the King. Don't take those words like you've seen it a million times in a siddur or something. Melech HaOlam. Our relation. When I say King of the universe, I'm saying something unique here. First of all, not every nation in the world recognizes there even is a King of the universe. Meaning, not every spiritual culture knows there's a king. And even those who know there's a king would never think for a second you can have a relationship with the king. It's so far removed, it's so out there. How are you ever going to have a relationship with the King of the universe? Now, for a lot of you, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but let's put it like this. If you knew what the universe was made of, meaning the actual metaphysics, physics we know a bit about, because we have physicists and scientists and stuff. But then there's the metaphysical world. The metaphysical world is an extremely complex world, filled with all kinds of stuff. Some of it is dangerous. Some of it is clean and clear and holy. Some of it is dark and scary. There's a whole metaphysical world out there. And the people, spiritual leaders, when I say spiritual leaders, I'm talking about the ones who understand the metaphysics. These spiritual warriors, let's call them, know the metaphysics. And it's extremely complex. You'd have to dedicate your entire life to get anywhere there. For you to get anywhere in understanding metaphysics would be a life dedication. But meanwhile, we're not talking about, Jews aren't relating to all that metaphysics. We are, but we don't know we are. Meaning you're just doing a mitzvah. If you're doing some mitzvah, you're doing a mitzvah, you don't know what the metaphysics are, and you probably don't even care. Why? Because we're relating to the let's say, the power source of the metaphysical. That whole complex metaphysical world, well, where did all the energy come from? It came from the king. It came from what's called the king of the universe. Well, what universe is there? There's the physical universe and the metaphysical universe. And he's the king of it all. He's the power source of the whole thing. And our relationship to this king is a direct link to the king. Something that's, you have to understand, is chutzpah for you to believe you have that relationship. Meaning, you know what you're saying ultimately? You're saying, let me just get some air on for us. Is this room getting stuffy? Or
Yeah,
is
it is.
it getting totally stuffy? I'm going to turn on some AC. Okay, here we go. Now I'll get some air. Imagine you go on safari in Africa and you get whatever, let's say your driver falls off the, I don't know, he crashes the Range Rover and dies. And so now you're stuck in the back of a Range Rover. And next thing you know, you got like some African tribe, with spears circling around the Range Rover. And they finally pull you guys out of the Range Rover and take you to the chief. And now you're sitting with this chief who's got a big bone going through his nose. His eyes are rolled up into his head. He's shaking like crazy. It's there's a giant thunderstorm going on, only on you and your friends who are in the Range Rover, because he's creating the thunderstorm, because they can do that kind of stuff. And so you're with this like serious medicine chief who's now deciding your fate. And there's a thundercloud over you. Everyone else is in 80-degree warmth. and you got pouring rain all over you because he understands the chamber called rain, which has to do with, we pray for rain. It's also hidden the angels in that chamber. But he knows all that stuff. And meanwhile, you're sitting there with like your yeshiva or seminary friends. And you're like, what's going to be here? And you've got this like crazy magic man who knows all the black magics right in front of you, who knows all the addresses. He's like the postman of the metaphysical, world. He knows all the addresses of everything. And you decide to say Shema because it doesn't look good. So you're like, Shema Yisrael, Hashem, and the medicine chief looks at you and says, hey you, what was that? And you're like, oh, I was just letting out a little prayer. Like, who you pray to? I'm praying to the King of the universe. He would be like, kind of like Pharaoh, who do you think you are? What do you know about metaphysics? You know a lot about metaphysics? No. You girls go to SEM somewhere here in Israel? Yeah, you know a lot of metaphysics? No. You have a relationship with the King of the universe? Yeah. Exactly. She was just like, yeah, I do. I have a relationship with the King of the universe. You realize the medicine chief, who since he was a tiny kid was chosen and trained for thousands and tens of thousands of hours to be the leader of this tribe and to know where to take them and when to take them, what season to plant and what, every single detail of the lives they'll be living that he needs to know from the metaphysics. And some Sem girl whose Range Rover driver got killed is like, has this like buddy relationship with the King of the universe. And you do. Now, there are Kabbalists who know what the medicine chief knows. You understand that? There are people like that. We have fewer in every generation, but you get that. There are people who know the metaphysics here. The Arizal knew all the metaphysics. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we're coming up to his yard site, he knew all the metaphysics. He knew much more than any, pygmy or African medicine chief. Rabbi Shimon knew much more. We know the metaphysics, but we simply have a relationship with the Creator that from the Sinai prophetic moment that no nation has ever achieved. And you want to hear the crazy thing is almost no great medicine chief ever achieved. You think a medicine chief ever experienced prophecy? They'll tell you themselves they haven't. Go find any medicine chief will tell you that the King of the universe talked to them directly. They're honest. They're not the kind of guys who lie. They'll be straight. They'll say no. It's not. I guess I haven't achieved that quite yet. And meanwhile, we're all walking around like we're the son of the CEO or the daughter of the CEO, and you are, because of the Sinai experience. Now we got to live it, though. We got to live it. We got to live up to it. You are from this special people, and the world's counting on you. You're like the teacher's assistant in this giant classroom of our world. And you've got to be a good conduit for the planet, for all the world out there, the Gentiles out there. You're the conduit, and you got to do a good job of it. Thanks for coming. Shalom, everybody. Be blessed. We did it.